Hello. Welcome to Tuesdays with Thriving. You have me, Brandy, here, all to yourselves this night. Our dear Shannon is on her way across a great big ocean. I don't know which ocean. I'm not good at that, but yeah. So she's not with us tonight, but I'm going to be here anyways. And let's see here. I think there's some basic stuff to cover first. So we are to March 26th, I believe. And anyone that's interested in getting into the Sun Valley Couples Retreat needs to get registered by April 1st. That will be our cutoff date. So I've put the link in the description of this live. So feel free to check that out. We're keeping this one pretty intimate. And so I highly recommend, if you've been teetering back and forth with the idea of going to it, get in there and secure your seats, because we want to be able to work closely with the couples that opt to come. And so again, the seats are pretty, well, it'll just be an intimate setting. So yeah. And what else? So tonight, a couple weeks ago, a few different ideas were thrown out, and the topic of triggers was thrown out. And that is what I'm going to visit a little bit about tonight. I have to tell you, this is kind of funny to, I'm just talking to myself. There's no Shannon here to like bounce back and forth with. That's funny. So here we go. Triggers. So triggers feel really uncomfortable. Triggers, they're kind of our natural response to either conversations or topics or emotions, environments, people that kind of elicit a higher level of discomfort. Thank you, Carrie, for my wall. I painted it. I wish you could see all of it. It's a sunrise. So triggers come on when we're feeling really uncomfortable, or that's what we feel like. We feel really uncomfortable when we're experiencing a trigger. And so for a lot of us, we experience them kind of in the same realm as when we go through like a fight, flight, freeze type response. That's kind of what can happen into our bodies. I know for me, when I go through a trigger, like money is a really great, horrible trigger for me to experience. And when I do, I can definitely, like after the fact, I can see how I went into this really defensive, hyper protective mode, and kind of the part of my brain that helps me make sense and rationalize just shuts down completely. And I say things that like I really don't mean or feel, but in that intense moment when it feels scary, that's kind of what comes out. So that's just an example of one of my triggers. So with triggers, we feel them in our body, and kind of something I thought might be helpful tonight is to give you kind of an exercise to navigate your triggers. I think triggers are really incredible. They suck to go through in the moment, but if you can recognize after the fact, oh my gosh, that was a trigger, or in the fact, like, oh my gosh, I'm triggered, like I can feel it, and you start to really pay attention to what happens in your body when you experience a trigger. That can be, it's even something you can kind of practice a little bit if you're aware of what type of triggers you have, or at least with one, you can kind of think about it and pull maybe a memory into your mind from the last time you remember experiencing it, or when you remember experiencing it and it felt big. If you can pull that idea into your mind, oftentimes you can kind of refeel what happens in your body when you experience a trigger. And that's really helpful information, because triggers can be so like, they take us off guard. And so helping your body, helping your mind cue into what it's like when you go through a trigger, one, gives us tools to be able to kind of navigate a trigger less, without making sometimes as much chaos that can come out of them. So like for me, when I feel a trigger, immediately in my mind, I feel defensive. And I find like I'm finger pointing really quick in my mind. And so that is a telltale sign that, oh, I might be experiencing a trigger when I'm kind of blaming everybody else around me. physiologically what I feel in my body, right? You can't quite see it, but like just a little bit above my belly button and below my rib cage, I feel the knot, kind of, it's a zing almost that happens right there when I feel triggered. And so I can start paying attention to my hands might get kind of clammy, heart rate might increase. Depending on if I'm having a conversation with someone, I might even notice like maybe my mouth starts to go dry. I pay attention for all of those different signs, and that can help me cue into like, oh, something's happening. Maybe I need to take a pause for a second. And if I'm talking with someone, the best thing I could do in that moment is call a quick timeout and take some time to just be with myself to kind of process whatever's going on. If you're with someone that you feel like you can process it with, go for it. But oftentimes if we're triggered with someone else, like we may just feel really defensive towards them in that moment. But if you can tune into what you do, one of the practices I use when I go through a trigger is I come up with that idea and I think about, okay, last time I was triggered, okay, this came up, this was the situation, and I really hold that in my head and I think about it. And then I pay attention to what's going on in my body, and wherever I feel it, I sit with it and I just let it be there. And instead of like fighting it or resisting it or everything else that you want to do, right, when something's uncomfortable, right? Like if you're at a stovetop and the top is hot, you want to pull your hand away, right? Like that's the same type of reaction we usually want to do when we feel a trigger. Is we want to do whatever we can to get away from it, or maybe even attack it to try and get it to go away, whatever we can do to suppress it. And we want to try to not do that if we can get ourselves in a safe enough place that we can allow ourselves to sit with it. Because when you allow the trigger to just sit with you and be there and just notice, okay, what am I feeling? Okay, so I feel it here and here and here in my body, and what are the thoughts that come up with it? You know, a lot of times our triggers are really about those things inside of us that we're unhappy with. A lot of times that comes out that we projected out onto other people. But oftentimes we find that those triggers are really things that are either we're unhappy with or things we're afraid of. Maybe they're related to past experiences, whether in our childhood or previous relationships. But oftentimes they're related to some type of fear. And so if you can just sit with it for a minute and allow it to be there and allow your body just to feel it and see what's there. See what feelings come up. See what thoughts come up. See what memories come up. And just allow it to be, because it takes a lot of the sting out of it when we can just sit with it. When we spend a lot of time running from the triggers, trying to avoid the triggers, suppressing the triggers, it actually kind of gives them more power. It's, I don't know, think of something really sticky and like you're pushing it away, but it just keeps sticking to you, versus if you just kind of sit there and allow, it has a way of starting to dissipate. It has a way of starting to dissolve. Now, it may not immediately, and you know, you might have a new experience that triggers something related to it. You know, it's not like a one-time fix everything. But when you can sit with it and discover like what is the underlying piece to it, one, you can start to understand it yourself. Like, oh my gosh, why do I react like this when I go to this environment? Or when I go to this place, or when I'm around this person, why do I react that way? I notice it, like one of my big ones, this is embarrassing, but I was a young mother, and so I've got a 16-year-old teenager now, and I always have it running through my head like, oh my gosh, am I screwing her up? Oh my gosh, did I mess things up? And so my interactions with her can be really strained. And when I'm triggered and I feel like maybe, you know, deep down I feel like I've done something wrong as a parent, but I'm in the middle of the trigger, like everything that I would sit with a set of parents or a parent and talk about, like, all right, so when this is happening, you don't want to do this. Like, that's exactly where I go. And I say the things I wish I wouldn't say. And, you know, I push in, I push in, I push in. And then I'm really disappointed with the outcome. I'm really disappointed with how I handled it. And so that's where, when I can identify like, oh, I have this fear that I'm failing as a parent. right? Like that's what's rooted in here. And then I can sit with it and I go, well, am I failing as a parent? Like, what's the evidence that says I am? Is there evidence that says I'm not? If I talk to other people with teenagers, what are their experiences like with teenagers? Are mine way different? Are mine similar? Right? And when I go through that process and I kind of dig deeper into that one, for example, you know, what I find is, gosh, raising teenagers is challenging. And there are times I do it well and times that I don't do it well. But again and again, what I find out is I'm right there with pretty much every other parent trying to raise a teenager. We're doing our best, and sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't, which helps me to get data that says, okay, I'm not a failure as a parent, right? So when that trigger comes on and I sit with it, I can kind of put it at bay a little bit more, and I can come back to center and go, oh, okay, I remember this. This is a familiar response. This is a familiar experience in me, but I remember going through this process, and actually there's data that says I'm not failing. I'm not a failure. It's challenging, and yep, sometimes I make mistakes, but I can get through this, right? And so each time I go through that experience, it makes it easier to kind of navigate that specific trigger. And so this is why, as much as triggers suck, I like them, because they're actually like, they're great little data points that can help us figure out, like, what are those underlying issues that kind of all of a sudden rear their ugly head in places that end up leaving us embarrassed or ashamed, right? Like, how many times have we experienced a trigger and we've reacted in a way and then lots of shame poured over us? And so not only, you know, was the initial experience uncomfortable, but now we have the aftermath of how poorly I handled that trigger. And so that's where I say, let's dig into these triggers and try to understand them better. And so then when I understand this about myself, I can go back and I can have a conversation with my daughter, and we can talk about how I acted and why I acted that way. And, you know, I give her the example of what it is, that it's a really human experience to have these triggers and have these reactions that sometimes are really poor. I can have these conversations then with my husband, and Brandon and I can talk, and I can say, gosh, that's a really hard experience for me to do when, you know, when my daughter maybe, you know, gets in trouble at school or something, or I, you know, whatever it is, whatever the interaction is that kind of triggers in me, like, you're a failure as a parent, you're a failure as a parent. When he and I have that conversation, it helps him understand how to better support me, so that he can kind of help me combat the tape in my head that's screaming what a terrible parent I am and that I'm a failure. And, you know, he can come in and help me ground a lot quicker and go, oh, you're not failing. You have a teenager in the house. And, you know, this is what it's like to be a parent. It's challenging at times. And, you know, teenagers go through this rite of passage where, you know, they're more difficult to raise at times because they're trying to do things more independently, and you know, they want to do things that are exciting because that's where their brain is at. And, you know, there's all these reasons. I understand why it's developmentally appropriate that she's doing these things or saying these things or acting this way, or I'm no longer the center of her world, right? And so he's able to help support me get back to kind of a homeostasis, and then I can kind of navigate things in a more productive way, and in a way that I don't have to feel near the amount of shame afterwards for. You know, I can be happy with myself that I approached those things or that interaction with Journey in a way that, you know, hopefully was more productive. So I hope that any of this makes sense. This is really awkward not having someone to like bounce off with. Okay, so triggers, they're uncomfortable, how we experience them in our bodies, how, if we're willing to lean into them, we can kind of gold mine little things out of us, and it creates opportunities to, one, love ourselves more, and two, connect more intimately with the people that we love and love us, especially when we can talk about those vulnerable conversations. I think one that I've shared from time to time was that I sometimes feel a big trigger when I feel like I've been left out. And so this was kind of a awkward experience, and it would be all of these arguments between Brandon and I early in our marriage. And And I didn't get it at the time. I didn't understand why I was reacting the way I was. And I would force myself into these situations with him where, one, I really didn't want to be, and two, it was just kind of weird for me to be there. But I was so triggered by feeling left out, that I would kind of force my way in. And of course he would, then include me because I would make such a scene or such a big deal about it, or it would be such a fight afterwards. And somewhere along the line, he and I were kind of able to figure out, oh my gosh, like, I get triggered. It's about feeling left out, right? And whether I can pinpoint the exact moment in my childhood, maybe where that started, or, that part doesn't necessarily matter. If you can come up with that, great, right? Because then you can kind of have empathy for yourself or for that little girl or that little boy in you, wherever that experience started. But a lot of times we may not know where it started. It could have been from infancy. It could be, things that we just won't remember. But when Brandon and I were able to figure that out and have that conversation, like, we were able to come to a pretty easy solution, which was Brandon will invite me and say, hey, honey, I'm taking the kids to the zoo, or I'm going to go have a beer with these guys, wherever, would you like to come? I'd love for you to come. And then I can say, oh, thank you for the invitation, but I think I'm going to pass, right? Or if I want to come, I could come. But what was really so great about that was that I was no longer feeling left out. I was no longer awkwardly forcing my way into situations that I wasn't invited to, or I wasn't forcing my way into a place that I actually didn't really want to be in, right? I mean, I can tell you how many times, I can't tell you exactly how many times, but lots of times I would go with Brandon to these places and then I'd be like, why am I even here? I don't even want to be here. This is not an activity I enjoy. But it was all kind of rooted in this fear of being left out and how much that hurt. And, we've been doing this now for probably 6-7 years now that we understood that trigger, and it's not near the trigger. Occasionally it happens, and Brandon will check in with me. Hey, how are you feeling? Are you okay? And, most of the time I can just laugh about it. I'm like, no, I'm okay. I understand what's going on. So anyways, I totally feel like I'm rambling without someone to talk back to me. Shannon, I really hope your trip is a lot of fun. All right, so I've rambled. There's so much we could talk about triggers, but I don't know, I might be boring people to death with the ongoing. I just wanted it to be a conversation that might give you some tools to help you navigate your triggers. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I would can I normalize that we all have them? We all experience them. We probably experience being triggered at least once a day, maybe multiple times a day. They may not all be 10s. When I started my job, I had this strong need to people please, and everything had to be right all the time. And the fear that I might do something wrong, just exhausted me. And now I'm to a place that, like, I don't have to be driven by that fear of being embarrassed or doing something wrong in front of my coworkers, because I've had experiences of making mistakes and they've still accepted me for who I am, right? So, triggers happen in all places, at work, at home, like I said, by feelings. I think I've been triggered even like before just watching a movie. Maybe a similar uncomfortable experience happens in a movie and that maybe I've had in my real life. I can be triggered by that. You'll have to excuse me. My allergies have been kicking in, so now the voice is going to try and go. All right. Any questions, comments? I'm not sure. I'm using a different computer. Oh dear, there's all kinds of them. I'm sorry. I'm just seeing there's comments. Carrie, is losing one's temper always a trigger? Oh, I'm going to say no. I'd like to put more thought into that. I think sometimes like we can be overwhelmed and lose our temper, right? I think a trigger might be a little bit different than just simply losing the temper. It might come out that way, but I think oftentimes you're going to find that the trigger is going to be rooted in some kind of fear or need, right? Sometimes it's really uncomfortable to think of what's my fear. What is it that you need, right? When I needed to be included, I needed to felt like they wanted me included. Does that make sense? All right, I'm gonna keep going through comments. In response to a trigger, I mean, yes, yes. Oh, welcome people, welcome. So yeah, any other questions, thoughts, comments? Trying to think what else I could include about triggers tonight that won't just, you know, keep me rambling here. Well, I think that probably covers a good discussion of triggers. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the comments. I'll check back. I would love to dialogue with you more. And of course, just one more shameless plug. We have, oh, that's what it was. We spend an entire section in the couples retreat talking about triggers and really in detail kind of helping couples work through what are the triggers, what are the needs related to it. And again, we just help get the environment so that it's supportive of going into these more vulnerable conversations. So if you know, you're listening to this video and you can get past my rambling and you think that maybe there's something meaningful to you in this conversation, please, I really urge you to consider looking at the Sun Valley Retreat. The setting is amazing. The rooms are amazing. The environment all over the resort completely is set up to support couples in finding a safe and relaxing environment away from regular life, right? Where we can kind of start to gently dig into some of these uncomfortable conversations that oftentimes just in regular life, for the sake of getting the kids to the bed or for the sake of trying to get to sleep or for the sake of finishing whatever report it is you've got to get for work or, you know, for the sake of all the other things that have to happen in a day, we put off and we don't have these conversations. This is an amazing time to be able to start that work. And I promise you, it's uncomfortable, but only cool things come from discomfort, right? Like no cool things come from things being easy. It comes from being willing to lean into that discomfort. So there we go. The link to sign up for the couples retreat is in the explanation of whatever this video is. And we are always readily available to answer questions about topics, about the retreat, about anything. So yeah, message us, check out the website, private message or whatever, however you want to reach out, please feel free to do so. All right, everybody, have a wonderful Tuesday evening, and I will see you next Tuesday.